20 videos of round 7.
Alright.
Wow.
They're recording most of round 7.
Yeah.
Interesting.
This isn't. It's not like selective. It's just
I thought it was
general
random.
poll.
Oh, okay.
The recording has started, but like obviously.
Then I did it,
it's
hopefully.
fine. No.
Now they can hear anything.
Oh, that too.
This might be awkward, but I just kind of hoping can have a sip of water. But
Oh no.
Yeah, I have water in my bag.
If you would like
Okay.
to,
If you want to just like use your like hand like tip it in your mouth. This one hasn't been opened yet.
okay,
Oh,
if
okay.
you want to record your speeches on your phones via your own audio, that is also fine, just because I don't know what is going to get picked up there.
Oh, right.
So that could be,
If the recording's bad,
it doesn't matter, but like, yeah.
I really hope I'm not
the ash
losing
portion. The ash portion is still better. I'm using the Beekeeper. Audible.
Yeah.
Audible.
Cool. Without further ado, I welcome the first ask.
I'll give you a 3-count timer before I start speaking. I hope this talking volume is comfortable for everybody. Alright, I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Always a good idea to start a debate by understanding why we're debating, right? So I'll give you a little bit of context about South Africa, what type of politics work, and like this system as it does function there, right? So South Africa is a party which has been governed by the ANC for the last 30 years. So they're basically an incumbent party, and then so that means that every opposition party immediately has an opportunity to now grab and momentum on their anti-incumbency sentiment, right? So, and the second big piece of setup that we need to understand about South Africa is that they have a first past the post voting system, right? This means that this dynamics of voting have a little bit of nuance to them, and you can game the system, and you need to be able to it's a game about voting politics as much as it is ideology, right? That means it's not always clear cut defined along ideological lines who gets to win or who stays in power, right? But this means that like the incentives of parties are quite clear most of the time, right? You understand what most political parties want. They want to get voted into power, and they want to keep that power as long as they can during election cycles. This means that as this being an actor-based motion of sorts, where the DA, we believe that like whichever side of this house does prove substantially that like the DA is likely going to keep power in this debate is the one that wins this debate. Now, secondly, going into this idea about like the agreement, the motion assumes that there's a national agreement. I think it's worth exploring that as government we have a little bit of fiat to be able to describe what this agreement might look like, or is likely going to look like, right? So, firstly, this means that I will first go into the describing the political landscape of South Africa, right? So you have the centrist party, that is the DA, you have the far left individuals at the EFF, and you have the ANC in between. This mechanism is devastating in status quo, and I will get into that a little later in my speech as to why it hurts both the EFF and the DA so much. But secondly, this means that like for any two parties to reach, or any two parties in general, political or otherwise, to reach any form of agreement, there needs to be some form of quid pro quo that happens, right? You need something for something. This means that likely that the DA is like going to make some concessions to the AFF, and vice versa, right? Where they along ideological lines, you are likely to see them push more to a median between both of their ideologies, right? Putting them in a similar landscape as where the ANC is politically. So, first, that is the first piece of context that I want to get out of the way. Secondly, what are the nuances of first past the post system, right? It means that any party that gets past the finish line or past the post, that is the 50% mark, is the one that takes power unanimously. This means it doesn't matter, you don't give half a shit if in a first past the post system you get 30% of the vote or 40% of the vote. If you're not at the 51% mark, you have lost, right? So that means two big mechanisms at play here, right? Which means, largely speaking, the most relevant voters you want to capture are your swing voters, your fence sitters, the people who sit in the middle. Secondly, the second large demographic you want, the second large sort of strategy that can be employed is that of vote splitting, right? The Republican Party uses the inversion of this logic in America to great effect, where you have the libertarians, you have the Libertarian Party, you have the Republican Party, you have all of these on the right wing, but then when the election cycle does come about, they all fall in line and vote for the same, vote along party lines, vote along Republican lines, and as a result, the Republican voters can using the system are so dominant in their elections, right? This brings me to my second concept that exists in systems with first past the post voting. That is, you have baseline voters. In every single system that exists on this planet, every political party, you have a certain amount of people who are loyal to the party, who enjoy the party. Why might this be? This might be because you like the candidate, your local candidate is represented by the party. The party's done good work in your area, your neighborhood, and you ideologically are very inclined or in line with the party. For whatever reason, you might be a very loyal voter of the EFF or the DA. This means there are certain baselines that do exist. But what does a loyal vote bank mean in the context of FPPA? Right? It means that it simply is a starting point from which you have to it's a starting point from which you can then move to the post, right? It is not going to get you to the finish line, and it doesn't mean that if you have a bigger baseline, so any argument beside negative about ideological alienation is already mitigated on our side, right? Where you have your baseline simply a starting point, right? Now, so why has status quo been so utterly devastating for the DA, right? You have two opposition parties that also oppose each other. Like I said, this means what does opposition or opposing a party mean really in the context of politics? It means you are trying to steal each other's votes, right? Steal whatever swing votes you can from each other. This means that when two parties are opposing each other, they are stealing each other's vote banks and not taking any from the ANC. This means two effects that lead from this, right? Firstly, that of the ANC having their incumbent status going completely unchallenged, and the momentum that exists going completely wasted, right? There is simply zero capitalization of that. Even if both individually try to, they're only hurting each other through this, right? Secondly is obviously they both reduce their vote share in the final election, right? EFF and the DA are the two largest political parties who are opposing the ANC, right? Now, how do we fix that in our paradigm? How do we ensure the best interest of the DA? Now, in this agreement, the DA being the larger party, through this quid pro quo, is likely going to keep a larger portion of the control of the coalition bloc, right? Considering there are other parties that do exist. So, if at the point the two biggest rivals to the ANC are now combining their vote bank, you now have a much larger baseline, which means you are so much closer to the post than you would have been individually as two parties, right? Secondly, you avoid the EFF doubling down and aggressively trying to poach votes from any alternate coalition that the side negative might propose that excludes the EFF, right? Now, and thirdly, the biggest impact we have in today's debate is that of capturing swing voters, right? Like we said, a likely concession that is going to be made is that the resultant coalition party in the promises and the resultant party with their promises and what policies they intend to pass at the point they came into power are likely going to be very in line with what the ANC has already been doing with their social democratic leanings, right? This means that these swing voters who are in the middle now have two choices as opposed to one. Now, remember, in the first system, there were three choices. You could either go centrist, far left, or social democrat. We think that the middle bracket represents the highest vote bank, right? So now with two choices, you are not only combining your baselines, you are also poaching swing votes from the ANC. You are poaching a lot of these swings that potentially exist, that do exist. Sorry, they don't potentially exist. That was a misspeak. So, as a direct consequence of this, you are more likely to get past that finish line, win the elections, and that we think is the ultimate benefit we can prove to the DA. That is why, for all these stated reasons, and I'm sure my second speaker has some lovely extensions coming in his speech, I am proud to open this debate for side Affirmative. Thank you.
I think the first app, I wasn't the first name.
electability for this upcoming election was always going to be hard for either team to win on, right? We're up against the incumbents, it's just very hard to predict elections a year in advance. I think the most important thing here is whether we have like success long term into the future, whether we're able to whether we're able to preserve the legacy of the DA, whether we're able to actually keep our principles and values and therefore have any chance of surviving for 10, 20 years. That's how we win this debate. Okay, a few things I'm going to do in my speech. Firstly, some setup. Secondly, why we just lose voters. And thirdly, the different outcomes of that. All right, setup. The first thing I want to do in this is talk about what I think the DA's interest probably is. There are two things I want to note here. I think firstly, probably acknowledge that immediate electability would be good if that were like fairly plausible. The second thing to say, and I think the most important thing here, is probably going to be long-term party success. 4 reasons we think this is so important, 4 reasons we think any team has to prove this to win this debate. The first thing to say is that obviously we agree that the DA cares about its various principles and values, right? It's what's in its constitution, what makes it different from other parties, it's why they do what they do and get up every morning, right? It therefore follows that they probably feel a principled duty to enable as many people as possible to enjoy a world with those voters, right? With those sorts of values. That's why they're in politics. I think what that means is that they want to win as many elections as possible into the future, right? To have a long-term sort of success, so that not only like people right now, but also future generations can enjoy the type of values and success that they want to promote. I think they really care about that if we think that they have any sort of like integrity as a political party at all. Second mechanism here is I think the DA is able to prosper without being in government, right? I think it's probably fine, and it's not going to hurt them at all if they lose this next election. It goes without saying that they've had decades without being in power, right? Like they haven't really been in power in living memory, and I think it's probably possible. I think it probably was possible for the DA to like maybe shift its values towards the ANC to try to like fight ANC for some of its power and to try and get in. They haven't done that. They have a revealed preference for staying true to their values rather than actually being in government. I think that was what they care about. Third thing to say is that the DA probably cares about its legacy, right? I think they have a principal duty to the people who built their party. They've been built on the works of previous generations. They probably want to preserve that. They can only preserve that by remaining as a party for some time into the future so people can look back and think about how far they've come as a party. Fourth reason we think long-term party has to win this any team a debate in this debate is that the immediate, like I said, immediate electability is always going to be difficult to like prove anyway. We're up against the incumbent, it's going to be very hard to win, and it's also just very hard to predict. Anyone can do anything in the next year. Probably hard for an F team to fulfill this burden on that. Okay. Other piece of setup I want to do is just talking briefly about the relationship between the DA and EFF, right? I think both teams know that they're opposed to each other, and importantly, they have been for a long time, right? ANC has been in power for like 30 years, it's very stable, we think they've been consistently been against each other. That probably means 3 things. Firstly, they have very different policies, right? This is pretty intuitive, they are at very different ends of the political spectrum. Secondly, they've been running attack campaigns on each other for some time, right? They're both in opposition, but they both have like a lot of power, and they're like constantly trying to be like the one to edge the next person out, or being like the main opposition or whatever. I think they probably have like smeared each other's names for ages. Thirdly, there's probably a lot of personal history where a lot of the leaders have specifically been the ones to call each other out, that kind of thing. I think it's important for context for this debate. Okay, second point then, why do we think you're likely to lose voters when you have a coalition as DA with EFF? Okay, I think it probably happens in 2 ways. The first and most likely is that you push a lot of voters to vote for ANC instead of your coalition. Why is it the case? There are 5 reasons for this. The first is that you and your coalition now have a lack of differentiation from ANC, right? ANC is a centre-left party. You are now broadly a centre-left party because your DA and EFF kind of combined. But ANC have all these other advantages. You are never going to beat them on their own turf anyway. ANC have name recognition. They've been in power for 30 years. They're really trusted, that kind of thing. I think it's going to be impossible to win. I think people are just going to turn to ANC when you have a coalition now. Second thing to say, and I think this is really important, is that there's likely to be a lot of coalition fracturing, right? Your coalition is not likely to be very stable, and the really important comparative here is that ANC has been in power for 30 years and is relatively far more stable. Why do we think it's likely that you're going to have a lot of coalition fractioning? We have 2 reasons for this. The first is that a lot of the other right-wing parties in a coalition are simply going to pull out, right? And that's really important for their immediate electability stuff, because we get EFF but lose a lot of other parties as well, so that rebuts that. I think the right-wing parties pull out for 2 reasons. Firstly, it's because that to the right-wing parties, to cater to EFF's policy demands is to abandon their own principles, right? It looks like on issues like welfare, climate change, higher tax, things like that, to fund all of these things. And so even if the coalition were to do well, it's bad for their individual parties because all their voter base hates them. They're just going to pull out of this coalition, it's not worth it. Also, moreover, they hate EFF because EFF have criticised them before, probably just have really bad personal relationships. Second reason is that I think the right-wing parties are going to pull out because the people literally can't work together because all of the enemies, personal attacks, things like that, blackmail, that kind of thing that I talked about in that context. Okay, third reason why white voters are probably going to turn to ANC is that the many alienating and divisive populist figures from EFF are now going to be associated with your party, right? This is a gain compared to a very reasonable, very stable ANC. Why is this the case? I think because of the populists in the EFF have made a name on criticising established political figures and systems, right? That's what populism is. They're being extreme, they have a cult personality, that kind of thing. They must continue that or lose their distinctive brand, of course, and also like breach their own principles, so I think they're going to stay quite similar. This means populists cannot stick to the coalition line, so when you go on things like political tours, they just blurt things out, they just say things that are a little bit out there, and they really upset all of your own voter base. And also, now that what they're saying is seen to represent the DA's views as well, because you're in a coalition together, I think that's terrible. Fourth reason voters turn to ANC is because now you just have worse policy drafting. Even if you do get into government, and this is really important why even if they prove their burden, terrible things happen. I think your policies are just horrific, right? And you just suck as a government. I think it's because it's impossible to set a policy agenda, right? Like, you have far left, centre, right, far right parties all in the same coalition. They're each pushing their own agenda. I think the policies are going to be really bizarre, and I'd quite like an example of what sort of compromise this is likely to look like. The resulting policy is likely to look quite shallow and inconsistent and often contradictory. Some policies pushing for free market, some for government intervention, probably neither do having a lot of success, probably both just like cancel each other out or make each other worse. I think that's going to be quite bad, or probably they're just never going to be able to agree on anything and you're going to be able to make change in times of crisis when you really just need a decision. Fifth reason why people turn away is that probably a lot of these mechanisms above are made worse because the media is going to turn against the coalition, right? I think drama probably sells, right? People have quite boring lives, they like entertaining things. If you bring up history and issues and look for any animosity and magnify that, I think that's really, really bad. So we have voters turn to ANC. I also think some voters are probably just going to not vote, right? And this is really important. I think a lot of the right-wing voters that are currently voting for DA, right? They're currently DA is able to appeal to by being centre-right. They're just going to be like, there's nothing for me here. DA is no longer like be able to serve any of its purposes that I was interested in, and they're just going to withdraw and fail to vote. I think you lose that as well. They don't get their immediate electability. They most certainly don't get long-term survival of the party. What do we think the outcomes of all of this? First, intuitively, we just don't win the election, right? It's already going to be difficult. I think if they fail to prove this, they clearly fail to meet their burden and can't win this debate. Second thing, and most importantly, is that there's just immense long-term damage to the DA, right? The DA looks really incompetent. Voters, they want stability. They blame the DA for any of EFF's misbehaviour or anything that they agree with, or they actively dislike the DA for bringing in EFF into the coalition, or they blame them for all the terrible policies and things like that I've already talked about. Like, who knows what the tax policy will be? I think it will just be like an absolute nightmare. I think this is really bad in the long term, right? I think firstly, people probably don't forget really, really bad mess-ups in government. Secondly, I think there's probably going to be a lot of internal party crumbling, right? Probably the president and whoever else are just going to have huge fights, and so they're not even able to run a campaign next time. Thirdly, the media spirals all of this. Fourthly, another party might just come in and take their niche, right? And bam, DA's gone, dead forever. You don't get the legacy. I think that's really terrible. Maybe you get a slightly better chance at getting into government this time. The DA doesn't care that much about that. Very proud to tune again.
I think first name and welcome to second affirmative.
Could I have a bit of water, please? So sorry.
No, don't worry, it's all good.
Thank you so much.
It's gonna stop me drinking me another 2 liters.
Thank you.
Okay.
You sold this from the influence.
Yeah.
Say hi.
All good.
Okay. I need a timer.
This one?
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna make this one.
Stop.
Go freestyle.
I'll give you a countdown before you start. 1 second. Okay. Alright. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I understand firstly that the DA simply has nothing to lose. For the past 30 years, the only legacy that they've had is lose, lose, lose. Since 1994, there has only been one government that's been by the ANC, right? So when side negative comes out and says, oh my God, we're failing our ancestors and our legacy, and all the work that the past generations have done will all have gone to waste. Understand that they brought about no results. There has been, I mean, sure, you might have put in some effort, but at the end of the day, there is no legacy to lose, right? If your only legacy is losing, you might as well lose that legacy, right? So at the point in time wherein they say that you, so let's analyze the pushes that they have, and let's talk about why none of the pushes actually have lead any parts to victory, right? So first main push is that they talk about how there is there's a compromise, that you compromise your values, and essentially the moment you try and say incorporate the EFF into your coalition and stuff like that, right? Understand that as a political party, your only goal is power and acquiring this power and keeping this power, right? And so so the power doesn't serve the values, but the values serve the right. So while sure that you might want to maintain ideological superiority in quotes, right, or say having a coalition, right? This doesn't serve any purpose at all at a point in time wherein you can't access and acquire this power and then actually make laws and policies that are in line with these values, right? So you saying that I am willing to sacrifice the next election is a huge concession that you're making to side affirmative, right? The DA's main goal and probably their only goal is winning the 2024 election, right? Further reason as to why it's so harmful to sacrifice an election, right? Understand that you as a party are dependent on funding from other sources to basically keep your party running, right? Your party is not self-funded, right? So at the point in time wherein you aren't the ones in power, your funding is already limited, right? You need to access power to get more investors to fund your party. So this means that without that funding, you wouldn't be able to campaign. You wouldn't be able to hire more manpower on the ground. You wouldn't be able to say. Essentially pay all your party workers and basically keep your party running, right? So this funding is crucial to ensuring that your party keeps living, right? At the point in time where you actively sacrifice your chances of winning the next election, right? You are essentially saying that you're fine with your party potentially dying or significantly becoming weaker over time, right? So that is point number one, right? So this sacrifice now is in and of itself a huge concession by side negative, right? Secondly, I understand that they fail to engage with all of our characterization of first past the post elections, right? Understand that over here, even if you reach 49%, it doesn't matter, right? You have to hit 51% seats to actually get to power, right? So at the point in time when you say that we will maintain ideological superiority at the cost of say this 51%, you are failing in your principle and pragmatic duty as a party to basically get access to this power, right? So again, a huge concession on their part with their lack of engagement towards first past the post elections and giving the system to basically acquire power in the system that's been set up, right? So thirdly, they talk about how it's basically very difficult to defeat the ANC, and so we shouldn't even try, right? Again, this mentality simply doesn't make sense to me, right? Understand firstly that the ANC has issues of anti-incumbency because any party who's been in power for the past 30 years is automatically very likely to face huge anti-incumbency issues, right? So in current status quo, there is heavy anti-incumbency sentiments in South Africa, and there's been a lot of momentum in both in terms of the coalition actually having a decent fighting chance towards beating the ANC, right? So it then becomes the moral and pragmatic duty and imperative of the DA to then acquire as much resources and better the chances of tipping the scales in their favor and defeating the ANC. How do they do this? By entering into a coalition with the EFF, right? So let's address a few more questions, right? They talk about how it's impossible for the EFF and the DA to basically come together because there are things like similar campaigns against each other, right? Understand that this happens always in politics, right? I mean, political parties are always like bad mouthing and trash talking each other. Heck, it happens within parties as well, where like people within the same party like one day are cursing each other out and like saying, oh my god, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, and the very next day are in bed with each other and and like saying, oh my god, this guy's the best guy ever, right? So political parties will do whatever it takes to basically get power and keep power, right? It doesn't matter if I trash talk him, as long as I am able to win elections with that same party. So I think it's important to draw a comparison over here with, like, say for example, Indian politics. Like so we are from India, and like it's a similar situation to South Africa, where say in the face of a larger, greater party like the ANC, which in India is like the BJP, where you have ideologically different parties coming together, like the Communists and the Shiv Sena, and they basically band together in the face of a greater enemy and like overcome ideological differences in the pursuit of power, right? So understand that the ANC is so large, is so dominant, and has been dominant for so long that people will be willing to make ideological sacrifices to gain power, because gaining power is their main motive, right? So understand that sure the ANC may have, say, a long history and power for 30 years, but they have had issues of corruption, they have had issues of misgovernance. South Africa isn't perfect by any means, and people want change. People want to see their ideologies represented. The ANC is center left, and so both the far left and the centrists don't get representation on their side, right? So because the ANC knows that it's enough if they cater towards this central vote bank of people to get past the first post, right? So because of how the two parties are split along the middle, wherein the DA and the AFF essentially have split vote banks and split ideologies. But what essentially happens is the ANC knows it no longer has to like target swing voters as hard, because swing voters will anyway come towards them because they are the only party in the middle which caters to these swing voters' ideologies, right? So at the point in time, again, another push. So in terms of ideological differentiation, they talk about how the coalition of the DA and the AFF will be indistinguishable from say from the ANC. Understand that two main reasons why this is the case. Firstly, sure, there may be similarities, but at the point in time where you have both centrist and far left people coming in together to form a coalition, you get representation from both the far left and centrist. This means that, as my first speaker said, you have to make concessions and compromise. So automatically you are on our side, you are far more likely to represent both the far left and the centrist, right? Understand that in their world, they offer zero representation for the far left and zero representation for the centrists, right? You offer no chance of winning the elections, no chance of representation, no chance of access to power, right? Sure, I mean you get to keep all your ideological values, but for what purpose? What purpose are all your ideologies and values if you can't actually get laws passed and actually bring policy changes to actually represent your values and your ideologies, right? So they talk about how their voter base will abandon them and stuff like that. Understand that you have a set baseline of voters who will always vote for your parties, right? So a person who's been born and has grown up in a certain area and been raised by a certain family and certain circles will always vote for the same parties usually. The swing voters are the people who you need to target, right? So the AFF's voter base and the DA's voter base aren't going to abandon them. Those voter base are set in stone. The voter base that you need to get past the post is the voter base that can only be that's only achievable by banding together forces, because these swing voters now see that okay, there is actually a chance where the combined coalition can actually beat the ANC, and they offer enough ideological variety for me as a swing voter to feel represented, and hence you're more likely to buy into this coalition, right? Whereas on your paradigm, these swing voters are bound to go towards the ANC and fuck over the DA, right? So understand that populists will hold the line, the party line, if it is in the interest of power, right? So when you have a greater enemy, you talk about how say maybe various elements won't be able to band together. Understand that the party line will be held like the Republican Party has a party line that is held because of yeah. Thank you. Very, very proud to do this.
Thank you, second affirmative. Welcome to second nation.
Sorry, can I just have a second to sort out my paper because the dips are very small. think this debate needs a bit of an intuitive sense check at this point. Because what Affirmative side is proposing is taking the Green Party and ScoMo and then chucking in Pauline Bennett as well. And then expecting that, Pauline Hanson? Pauline Bennett's a New Zealand politician. Anyway, creating an absolute clusterfuck where no one is going to agree with each other. We think even if they get into power, which we framed to no response, that is very unlikely to happen because of all the incumbency benefits, then what is likely to happen is this party is going to tear itself apart for a couple of key reasons to no response. Firstly, because people are going to blame each other during any point of downturn. Because at the point in time when anything goes wrong, it is likely to be considered like, if you are trying to keep getting votes, you're going to blame the other parts of the coalition. This happened in New Zealand when New Zealand First literally stopped existing as a party and fell out of the next government because they were the fault, took the blame for Jacinda Ardern's mess-ups. That is the sort of thing which is likely to happen in this debate. That's what's deeply problematic. I'm going to start with setup and a couple of clarifications, then I'm going to talk about the short term and the long term. On the setup, a note on FVP. This is empirically untrue. I don't know how to debate this because it's just a fact. They use a proportional representation system. But even if you buy their setup, because whatever, I don't think it matters, because firstly, FPP has runoffs, right? If you are unlikely to win and the EFF takes 5% of the vote or 10% of the vote or whatever, it doesn't matter because it pulls out from both sides. But secondly, we tell you that the EFF voters are likely to be pulled away from, are likely to pull away from the ANC in a comparative way in either world. So I don't think that matters. Secondly, on the framework, which we talk about, the second piece of setup here. So what we heard is the counterpush at Second Affirmative saying that you only care about power. I'm not going to repeat Abby's materials about values, but what I think is really important to note is that there was zero response to it. That we say that these people have been happy to be in opposition for 30 years, so clearly they act in a way which accords with that. The final thing is on funding and setup, and I think that we can flip this into positive material, because you need to think about who is likely to be funding a party which is lost for 30 years, right? They're still putting in money. A couple of things here, right? Firstly, we tell you that they want consistency. They clearly have an ideological bent if you're willing to keep supporting someone who is writing for centrist and centre-right policies for 30 years and still not winning. Secondarily, they want specific outcomes out of you. They want things like lower tax rates, and they want you to keep giving you funding. If you give in to the Bernie Sanders of South Africa, what is likely to happen is that these corporations are going to get all their money stripped away from them. That's really bad. And finally, we tell you that this isn't likely to be a huge diminution in funding at any point in time because they don't expect wins, otherwise that would they wouldn't be funding in the first place, right? So let's talk about their short-term win condition, right? They said firstly that they're anti-government sentiments. I think this is empirically probably not that true for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because of the fact that they keep winning for 30 years, it would have popped up in the short term. But secondly, because if we look at who is the larger minority group, populists run off anti-government sentiment, while centrists more likely run off the ideological bent. Considering the centrists are the larger group in this debate, we think that there is less buy-in to a broad anti-government sentiment. So we think that that's a low form. But secondly, we need to look at the specific African context, where in post-colonial states, people have led for 50 years as the leaders of Rwanda. So we say it's normalized within this context, and it is something which is not seen as particularly strange, so there is less of that sentiment growing up, as opposed to if it was happening in a Western context, right? Second thing they told you was that second thing they told you was that you don't lose the right-wing voters. I don't think they're substantially engaged with the material we brought you about why it is that these right-wing parts of the coalition, so parties 3, 4, 5 and the size of the opposition, are likely to be hugely turned off for a few reasons. They said that it's fine because it is God, I have so much paper. They said it is fine because of a couple of things. They said firstly that you are likely to be able to just deal with this because people want power as first and foremost. I think we proved that that's not true. But secondarily, what we told you to no response is that the media is likely to weaponize this, right? We told you that the media is likely to pull on this disparate tensions, to pull clips of the right-wing leaders and the centrist leaders saying that we think taxes are something which should go down. We think that personal responsibility is something that is good. And then clips of the left-wing leaders saying the opposite thing. And our worst case is that this is historical, but we tell you that likely you can't make a leopard change its spots, right? So they're going to keep saying these things while they're still campaigning in the same way, which means it's going to look internally inconsistent as well, right? Second thing they told you on this was that losing is really bad. We tell you losing is fine for 3 reasons, right? Firstly, on the values, already covered that. Secondly, though, we tell you that we're still able to operate power because the threat of losing the election forces the ANC to change policy. A consistent and strong opposition party is likely to have an influence over the government, and they need to cater to it, not lose votes. That means that if you are a strong and consistent DA, you are more likely to make the ANC change things and get your policies in power. But thirdly, we tell you the efficacy of opposition is broadly stuck on credibility, in that if you are an opposition who says things that are reasonable and does things that are reasonable and are viewed by the public as a reasonable alternative, at one, boosts your future electorability, but secondly, it means you're likely to influence parties. So when the National Party in New Zealand got up and was like the left-wing party, like Labour, is being too extreme with its COVID policies, people are like, that's reasonable because they're not taking an outlandish approach, right? That's the sort of thing which is really important, right? The final thing they told you is that our push around relationships is unlikely to be the case because people like get infighting all the time. I think firstly this doesn't deal with scale. We told you this is huge levels of infighting at the point in time where people have literally spent 30 years attacking each other and calling each other like really horrible things, and specifically attacking the policies and the implications, right? And they've run against each other in so many elections that there are so many skeletons in the closet. So I don't think that particularly works. But secondarily, they didn't engage to the specific personal histories where even if people are generally able to put things aside in light of the better, like in light of a good future, which I don't think they can, I think that people won't be likely to do that at the point in time where they think it's going to harm them. Finally, let's talk about like marginal and swing voters, right? So a couple of things here, right? They just asserted that you want to achieve swing voters at first, but like, again, specific, whatever that word. What we tell you is who do they actually swing this between, right? Because we tell you there's a couple of groups. You swing between ANC and the EFF, and that's someone who generally leans towards the left. And if that's the case and you're leaning further towards the left, we tell you that the imposition of this centrist and right-wing coalition group means that you think you're less likely to get overall left-wing policies. So if you're an EFF ANC swing voter, you're more likely to return to ANC. And the same thing applies on the comparative, where if you're an ANC DA swing voter, you're scared of the EFF, and so you're more likely to swing into the centre. We tell you that both groups of swing voters are likely to go for the option which is safe and reliable and going to give them policies they like, as opposed to the concern of going away from something. Finally, they told you on vote splitting, right? I think this doesn't really work that well because of the vote splitting going further right. We tell you that at the point in time, again to no response from first, that we are likely to lose right-wing coalitions from this election. We think the right-wing population, like if you just think basic stats 101, right? Like there are probably a group of right-wing people that are larger than a group of really extreme left people, because generally political populations are at least somewhat bell curved. I think it's probably an unreasonable prima facie claim that there are more super left-wing people than there are like centrist and further right at all. I don't think that's a reasonable claim, right? Finally, they said you can like represent both. Note that they could never provide an example how you could give a policy which is both far like left, centrist, centre right, and right wing. I think that's because it simply doesn't exist, and their policy their policy standstill would be so small. The only thing they could do is shallow claims to a broad audience, and I think that's really problematic because I think that if they ever get into power, this is transitioning into the long-term material, which again, no response to. What we tell you is that if they ever get into power, things are going to grind to a standstill. But note specifically the harm that accrues to the people. In that, if the government is bad and doesn't do things which help the people blame the government for that. People are like, this government couldn't pass policy, and DA is the face of this government. They're the major party. So at the point in time where this policy stands still and it doesn't get passed, and it's because of the DA pulling in the EFF, that's super harmful. At the end of this debate, I don't think they can ever win in the short term. I think we're more likely, but there's no response to any of our long-term material, so I'm happy to win on that too.
Negative. Welcome to the affirmative.
Alright, let's start with the very basic thing. Okay? We intend to prove that it's better to win and actually be in a position of power where you actually can implement your party's own policies into the general public without actually without the doubt of ever actually having to come into power. We've seen for the past 30 years that the DA hasn't actually come into power, and they have in fact been the most major opposition that the ANC has faced. Right? This is a stated fact, and when we take into account that DA actually is going to go into coalition with the EFF, it stands to reason that there are certain gives on either side of the thing. That is the basic definition of a coalition, coalition and some, there's going to be some gives on either side of the party. But we still need to realize that the most centric representation is still going to happen on the side of the DA because they still have such values on their side. They only choose to co-opt into certain left ideologies so as to cater to a bigger voter bank and have more votes for their side, right? We need to understand that from a party's perspective, what is most important is growth. If they have been doing something for the past 30 years and they've been losing, I think it's high time to change, right? Political parties need to evolve to the needs of the people that they serve. This is a simple ideology that needs to be understood by sideline, because we need to understand that for such change to happen, and when we have an other opposing party that is actively trying to get the same position of power, an enemy of your enemy is definitely going to be your friend. It just stands to reason, and it stands to be the most pragmatic approach for DA to actually enter a coalition with them to get into to win or have a chance of winning a 2024 election. And that's in our worst case, right? On your best case, where you don't go into a coalition and you want DA to represent itself as its own ideological you basically set them up for failure, in which they need to have an extreme change in the kind of situation there is in South Africa maybe to win, because we've specified over the first two speeches it's first past the post kind of voting in South Africa, right? Which means that it doesn't matter if you have 49% of your thing, even if you're DA, you're still going to lose because 51% of your opposition is still winning and you still don't get to pass, or you don't get any say in the policies that are passed. Why is this important? One, on our side, DA has a chance to portray their ideological stances in that politics, right? Why is this important? And I'm going to go about this in a few ways. I'm going to acknowledge all the points made, right? We're going to take that. We're going to take the point that first speaker said ANC has certain advantages because they're in the center of the scale between the DA party and the EF party, right? This is not necessarily true because DA is also recognized as a significant opponent to them, right? So I don't understand why your side is being so dismissive about the power that DA has in the first place. Secondly, to stability, right? We can say for a fact that it can lead to a certain amount of complacency and stagnation for the concept of democracy, because for the past 30 years, you have been the only serving party, or the ANC has been the only serving party for you. By actually having a coalition, you get to challenge this narrative and see if this democracy is actually what is best for you. So even at our absolute worst, where there is a coalition and we lose, we still challenge the core tenet that you aren't the best possible party that people can vote for. 3. Worst policy drafting, differing ideologies, self-mitigation, and bad in times of crises. These are the 3 main points that you bring about. I'm going to say one thing. In crises, no party is going to be like, oh my god, let's advocate for free trade right now. In times of crises, in times of this thing, people tend to put ideological differences aside and actually focus on the problem at hand. I don't think that stands, and that point of crises doesn't work. Second, implementation of policies in and of itself, right? Yes, implementation of a single policy that caters to every single spectrum of this political ideological beliefs is not possible. However, by having a coalition, you can cater to all of them by passing different policies that can cater to different sections of society as a whole. Third, media presence. The right voters of DA will still vote for them no matter what, because they actually have a voter bank. It's not like they don't have a voter bank at all, and just because they enter a coalition with another political party, people will stop voting for them altogether. Like I said, they are still the best representation, and they are still the best representation of the ideologies of the right. Why is this important for us, right? From a media perspective, people will understand that coalitions happen when they are trying to actively take down something that isn't in their ideological favor, right? As part of DA, as part of EFF, when they are in a coalition, they as a party together are trying to take down another party, right? Why is this important? This is because it then makes ANC not the biggest competitor. Why is this important again? Ties into our half past the post principle, in which we have a greater chance at winning, greater chance at actually passing our policies, which doesn't happen on your side of the thing, and you haven't really engaged with. 3. External parties' involvement that takes away from the legacy ideology and whatever it is that the DA represents, right? I don't think this is likely to happen, because most parties that come into power when just starting out tend to get into power by having coalitions with other parties that already exist. Now, this same ideology can also be built in to, can also be implemented by DA, or it's what DA is trying to do while actually trying to get into power. This works for us on 2 levels. One, in disproving why external parties can suddenly take over the political scene in South Africa by storm and absolutely decimate everything. And 2, by proving why DA is more likely to come out on top. next I would like to say, if DA's legacy is to lose, as my second speaker pointed out, then we would rather not lose. We would rather grow as a political party and actually bring about change in society, right? And we also need to understand that a coalition intrinsically means that there are concessions being made on both sides, which I don't understand why there needs to be this extremely high tension of, this blame game of, I'm going to blame you, you're going to blame me if something goes wrong. What about something goes right? Like, let's have a little bit of an optimistic approach to this, right? Like, if something goes right, then the whole party as a whole stands to gain. There's nothing to lose over here, right? We need to understand that this blame game doesn't work. Next, we need to know that just because they've been losing for the past 30 years doesn't mean that they want to lose as a political party, because like you said, funding, right? People are funding them for the past 30 years, they're not winning. Why are we funding them? What's going to change? What's going to happen next? I'm not going to keep funding something that's basically going to lead all my money down the drain. I'm not going to vote for a political party that basically keeps disappointing me. So I'm going to have to buy into this idea of a coalition where I'm going to have to which caters to a bigger ideological range of people, and it basically helps us empower ourselves both as a country, both as a political party, and helps civilians as a whole. So I don't understand where we are having the things. Thirdly, I would like to wash, even if it's the worst case, if it's a wash, I would like to point out examples in India which similar to the political scene in South Africa, right? BJP took coalition party and took down their biggest competitor, which was the INC, and now they are the biggest political party in India, right? This just goes to prove that in the worst case, DA can use this coalition as leverage from the next term to actually enforce themselves into this political scene and actually have more of a strong stance or have some sort of foundation that is being set for themselves. So even at our worst case, at our best case, we basically tend to prove that DA has more to gain than to lose. Okay, we also need to prove that if losing is fine, like the side neg is telling us losing is fine for ideological this thing, then why do they keep participating in politics? Why do they even represent themselves in the first place? Nobody wants to represent themselves for the sole benefit of losing to hold an ideal, right? People win, and when they win with their ideals or representation of their ideals, it's much more powerful, impactful, and brings about change rather than actually having to do it. So ANC aren't. And another point about ANC not being threatened by this thing, it doesn't really hold true. And also another reason is because ANC isn't really threatened by any of their oppositions because their oppositions aren't big enough. So by actually having this coalition, you tend to put more pressure on ANC, which brings me back to my previous point about us questioning the legitimacy of the efficiency of the governance that's already in place. So with all of that said, I'm proud to.
The affirmative, welcome to the negative.
Are you ready? The media has a long memory. If you believe us that to any extent there is going to be fracturing within this party that results in either incomprehensible policies or, more likely, public infighting that is embarrassing for the leaders that are part of these parties, you necessarily have to believe that that stain on DA's reputation is going to last going into the future, allowing other opposition parties to take over the base that they've worked so hard up until now to capture. That long-term perspective is what's far more important overall. Okay, two subparts to this speech. Firstly, the likelihood that the DA will win this election. Note, the affirmative team's winning this debate is contingent on them proving that you are very likely to win this election with this happening in the face of the problems we tell you are going to happen. Second key point, likelihood of winning in the future, and why even if you never win in the future, staying in opposition is actually still much better than like losing your reputation and going backwards. Okay, so first sub-point then, likelihood of winning this election. There are two scenarios. This is just me like trying to clean up what I think is quite a messy and confusing debate. So first scenario is that the right-wing parties that are already in a coalition with DA pull out of that coalition, right? And that rests on the same mechanisms that would lead to party fracturing, so I'll address that later. The outcome, if this happens, is that all of the stuff the Affirmative team want to tell you about the DA plus these right-wing parties coalition getting more voter-based numbers by adding in EFF doesn't work, because they actually lose the voter base that the right-wing parties bring into that, which means there's no way you're getting the 51% they wanted to tell you that you get. So if we can prove that right-wing parties are likely to pull out because they are so diametrically opposed to EFF, we automatically win this clash. We also tell you that this looks really messy, it looks like bad leadership and a totally failed plan. The media are going to weaponize this also stands your reputation. Right, what is the second scenario then? The second scenario is that the right-wing parties stay because of the reasons the Affirmative team brings you, that they want their power and they're willing to compromise. We will win, show you that you're still not likely to win by showing that you're still likely to have party infighting and fracturing that basically sacrifices your party identity. An important context here, I think, is that ANC have captured the left-wing vote. I think that our second speaker does quite a lot of work on this to show you that that vote is already captured. So I think that the starting point we have is that adding EFF does not necessarily add much differentiation at all. Okay, key question that we have to answer here. Will parties compromise on policy, aka will they be able to come together at all? The Affirmative team give you one key reason that they will, which is that parties want power. Why, however, will they not? First thing to note is that their voter base is literally latched on to them as a distinct entity from other parties, right? Why is that particularly so in the case of extreme left-wing or right-wing parties? Because they are radical, they are often anti-establishment, and note that because DA has been the main opposition party for a number of decades at this stage, by many people, DA are seen as part of the establishment, part of the system that is the problem that they are trying to fix, the exact types of people that they do not want to vote for, even though they might also see ANC as establishment. DA are a part of that in their minds. But also note that left-wing and right-wing views are like diametrically opposed, right? Like that's just obvious. Like left-wing views are literally like, yes, more government intervention, more taxes, more welfare. Right-wing views are the opposite of that. They are less government intervention, less taxes, less welfare. It is very difficult to see how you could compromise on one of those and then go the other way on the other without those views then and policies contradicting themselves and turning off a voter. If I'm left-wing, I'm not going to vote for a party that is pushing for more welfare if they're pushing for maybe like far less taxes that mean that I'm just like, where is that welfare going to come from? I don't understand how that works. Or they're like pro-disability benefits but anti like unemployment benefits. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to go for the stable party, ANC, that is already slightly left, probably offers more. But more than that, we tell you that generally these parties with those distinct brands they already have are going to lose funding, right? Because if you effectively compromise so much that you just blend into the, what are they called, the DA, basically you blend into it, why as a funder would you fund them over the DA when they are the ones that capture all of that same stuff? They'll just fall into the DA image. They have an essential reason, the EFF and these other right-wing parties must maintain their own distinct identity, not only from each other, but from the DA in order to make sure that they stay alive as parties into the future, that they don't fall into the DA's party, and they don't want to be seen as hypocrites by their voters to relax so much, because there's compromising a bit where your voters understand it, but compromising from the right to the left is compromising to an extent that your voters are not going to understand. They're going to be incredibly turned off. Right-wing parties that are currently in the coalition with DA are going to see this as what it is, a death knell for their voters, who will probably just not vote at all in this election, or will not vote for them in future, wait for a new party to crop up that's more right-wing and that they feel won't compromise those right-wing values to just fit in and get into power, but to achieve what in power? If you're a voter, why would you vote for a party to get into power when they no longer represent the values they have? Yes, maybe you're loyal, but only to a certain point, right? No longer if the party doesn't represent the values that you want them to. So that probably means that those parties split up and we win this debate by quite a long way. However, what are the other two things that happens? First, why are you going to get voter withdrawal? Basically, this is what I talked about. This means people won't vote at all, right? There's certain very left-wing people, very right-wing people that just won't vote out of protest, not represented. We saw this happening with Trump. People want to feel represented by their political party. That's really bad because it also loses the total number of voters that are available as your base. Second thing that probably happens is that you turn to ANC, because if it is true that all these parties compromise, you either end up centrist or centrist left, right? Which means that you are not that distinguishable from ANC. However, you have all the other problems that I'm about to bring to you. You are less stable, you are less reliable, you are going to be a disaster for this country, and the media are going to weaponize that. So, why will this coalition likely fracture? The Affirmative team tell you, no, the coalition probably will not fracture because they're so busy and focused on fighting ANC that they're not going to fight each other, and that doesn't really make sense. That's not how it works, right? When you have two opposition parties, it's like having a government bench opening and closing and debating, right? You disagree but for different reasons, and you say the other person's stupid for disagreeing for the different reason than you. You want to maintain that individual brand image, therefore you don't just agree with them, you want to keep yourself distinct even though you're part of that coalition. And yes, it is true that politicians fight all the time and that people can move past it. However, that doesn't change the fact that certain personal rivalries that stem from literal personal attacks, that's like around very personal issues like cheating on your wife or other personal things that does come up in politics, means that you just have an inherent dislike and inability to work well with people. We told you from first, the media are going to capitalize on that. Any movement, any interview where people don't seem to get along is going to evaluate distrust in the voter base, and they're more likely to turn to ANC. But also, we told you that it is true that you now have to be associated with the weird things that the EFF populist figures say. In interviews, you cannot control what they say. They make a slip up, they say something that's not in line with what the coalition officially stands for, but they represent the coalition now. They represent the DA, and now you're associated with some weird populist figure who is part of this cult of personality, who has said something that you don't believe, and there's only so much you can do to distance yourself from that because you've chosen to endorse that figure. Voters see that, the media sees that, that's really bad, you're probably not going to win this election. However, in the long term, the Affirmative team tell you there's no chance of you winning. But if you actually believe what they've told you, there is an anti-incumbency movement that is growing, and if that is true, it stands to reason it will only grow as time goes on and that government continues to be incumbent. It is therefore more likely under their own analysis that you are more likely to get in based on that rising movement over time. But if you do what they want you to do, you can't recover. Why is that? One, people feel betrayed, right? If you don't vote for them once, what's the chance that when you're in power again, you won't stick to your policies, won't stick to your values? Two, it's very embarrassing. The media have catastrophized on it. Even if it's not catastrophic, it's just like a failed effort. It's probably embarrassing moments that arise. Thirdly, the parties bashing each other probably gets a lot more personal because they've got personal experience working with you now and can say even meaner things about you. And four, you probably lose experienced members who are so shamed or have had such a bad public time that they can no longer go forward. That means that you can't recover from this loss of your public image, and that is far worse in the long term.
I think the next, I will go with the next slide.
The only thing that the DA cares about is bringing about change in society. We're not convinced that that's entirely true, right? We think that there's probably a principled duty to those that you owe your existence to as a party. There's probably a principled duty to stay true to what you believe in, and there's probably also a revealed preference that the DA does actually care about all of this and acknowledges all of this. Not a whole lot of response to that. I think that, however, even if it is true that the DA only cares about bringing about change in society, we still win this debate. Though it would still be nice if you took those principles into account. Okay, three reasons we still win regardless. First is that we probably aren't able to win the 2024 election, and so AF don't meet their burden. Why is that the case? I think it's because we lose all those right-wing parties, right? Because they can't get in that many policies, because EFF is just so opposed to them, because of their own principles, or because they just don't like them and it's just hugely personal. I think that probably at least cancels out the gain that we get from EFF. Moreover, we told you that we didn't get many EFF voters, we don't get these DA voters, we lose them to ANC, voter withdrawal, less funding, that kind of thing. Really important thing to note is that there was just always a really high threshold for the AF team to prove that this is just like a very appealing coalition, right? It wasn't enough for them to prove that it's just a fine coalition, that they maybe put together some kind of acceptable, those sort of confusing policies with all of the different ends of the spectrum, right? Because ANC? Yeah, Yeah, ANC is the incumbent party that have been in for decades, right? They're far more stable, they're far more trusting, so the burden was always going to be really large for them to prove that. I don't think they meet that. I don't think they can win this debate. Moreover, though, I think we wanted to prove, secondly, that it's totally fine to be in opposition, right? And I think it was important that we proved this because it mitigated their benefit of winning, right? Because opposition is actually fine, so winning can only be slightly better. But probably, in this case, being in opposition is just better than winning because you're actually, if you win, you probably just can't get that many of your policies in anyway as the DA. Whereas if you're in opposition, we told you can do things like actually have a media platform to be able to stand up in the media interviews and you can spread all of your ideas and values to the whole population. And South Africa probably doesn't get to hear all those things you care about. If not, it probably allows you to impact government policies. It probably allows you to scare ANC into having policies that more align with what you think, the way you think things are done. It allows you to have the personal satisfaction of just like working in politics in a way that exemplifies your values. I think being in opposition is actually great. I think the DA does a great job of it, and probably because of all the principal stuff we talked about, that is actually way more preferable. And even if they wanted to exercise a lot of change in society, they can probably do just as much in opposition, considering just the huge compromises they'd have to make, even if they won. So I think on all of those grounds, we're still able to win. But moreover, even if we don't prove any of that, I think there's just enormous long-term harm that we've just wasted so extensively throughout the course of this debate. That means even if we are able to win this next election, even maybe the election after that, I don't think it's worth it for all of the reasons that we're likely to lose voters probably for quite a long time, and we're probably lose things like our legacy and all that kind of thing. And we gave you many reasons that the long-term impact was particularly likely to be very intense, right? Because ANC was always going to remain a very safe and easy appealing alternative for people to vote for. So there's quite a low threshold for voters just to return ANC to power. We told you how about this would be the first time the media would really blow this out of proportion, right? Particularly considering this is the first non-ANC party to get in 30 years. I think probably they have a huge incentive to dramatize things and make it seem like a really big deal and never let anyone forget what happened. And moreover, all of the other stuff we've told you all down our line, how internal party institutions crumble. They literally can't put together politicians to actually go and walk through various communities. The media blows things up, another party comes in and fills their niche, and suddenly there's no opportunity for them to ever practice politics again. I think that's really bad. I think long-term impact is what we care about most, but even if that's not the case, I think being in opposition is better than winning. Even if that's not the case, we don't win this election. Very proud to negate.
Thanks, bro.
Welcome to the Afterlife was up debate.
Alright. Starting the speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think side of neg falls out of this debate and they lose this debate at the point they say they are okay with losing, right? You simply cannot deny the concession, the size of the concession they've made in this debate. So I will run through the big summarize this debate, go through the big contentions that were there, why we took it, and the weighing metrics that you need to use to weigh out all of them. Firstly, we see a fundamental mischaracterization and misunderstanding of what coalition even are, right? They give you this idea that these parties can't work together, all of them have to ideologically compromise, and all of them have to all the voters are going to feel betrayed at the end of a coalition. That's simply not how it works. It's simply, my second speaker did come up here and give you good analysis to how everybody feels a little represented, and these vote bank betrayal is not as big a deal as they make it out to be. We don't see much analysis as to why that is necessarily going to happen, because the engagement most people have with their political parties is with their local constituencies, their local leaders, and who they vote for, right? So these vote banks tend to stay pretty solid. We don't see why all of a sudden at the point you form a coalition, everyone's going to be fuck this, I'm going to leave, right? Secondly, for some odd reason throughout their debate, they cater to the right-wing vote. They talk about how losing the right-wing vote. I beg you to read the info slide. The three big parties in South Africa are the ANC, which is social democratic, which is left. Then you have the EFF, which is far left, and you have the DA, which is centrist. Where are the right wings? The three big parties are all left or center left at best. This means that even at the point they fail to analyze why the right-wing vote, losing it would be such a devastating blow towards the coalition, right? Secondly, now, on this hand, I've held up 2 fingers. Last I checked, that is greater than 1 finger, right? Why is this important in this debate? Because they talk about this clusterfuck that happens, right? And they talk about how they'll be, that these parties hate each other and can never cooperate. Now, again, last I checked, 100 greater than smaller than 100, right? So why? There's a 100% probability that the DA is going to be fighting a two-front war in the opposition because they are constantly fighting with the EFF and stuff within the halls of parliament, even as the opposition. So even at the point we lose, because they're united under the umbrella of an opposition party, they have incentive to cooperate with each other. At the point they've gone that far, at the point you've entered the same room, might as well sleep at the same bed, right? So there is no, we simply see no idea why like they're going to now form a coalition and then start catfighting, right? So that line of argumentation simply didn't really make sense from the perspective where I was sitting, right? So I would like for that also be to considered. Secondly, in terms of their push about how like they can cause a real how legacy or like beholden to the people who fund the parties, right? How long can they milk the people who are funding a losing party, right? Clearly something needs to change to make a change. You cannot expect your funding just to be based on ideological lines if you're basically a money black hole and you're never making any substantial changes in your in the election results. We give you a clearly defined path and how forming a coalition can be very strategically advantageous for the DA, how it aligns with their interests, and how even if they lose at the point, if that's in contention, we can they don't have to fight a two-front war within parliament and their own construct is flipped on them, right? Where they are now incentivized to work together and push back against ANC policies. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to close out this debate. Thank you.
Debate and welcome questions across the floor. Shake hands. We'll get to.
Good debate.